right, hi everyone. I'm Jessica Shade, and as Alice mentioned, I'm the Director of Science Programs for the Organic Center, and we do research and communication about the science behind organic food and farming. So how many of you feel in your hearts that organic is healthier for you, for the environment, etc.? Yes, so many people out there. And so a lot of people feel this intuitively. But what a lot of people don't know is that there's a lot of hard science behind what we feel in our heart to be true. And that's where I come in. So science isn't friendly. Science isn't something that necessarily connects with the public. And our society is set up in this way that doesn't make science accessible for people outside of academia. So people who, even if they might have been interested in science, end up feeling alienated from science. I mean, the stuff that I read, even the stuff that I publish, gets published in, first of all, scientific jargon, which is, it's like reading a different language. When I first got into science, I had to read the same paragraph 10 times before it filtered into my brain what it even meant. It also gets published in journals that are really expensive to get access to. So the data that's so important to people that's getting published is getting published in these private journals that people, even if they wanted to read a bunch of dense scientific jargon, can't. Last week, I purchased a scientific paper. So this is one paper, 5 pages long, for $32. $32 for one paper. I read dozens and dozens and dozens of papers a week. So you can imagine how that would add up. I usually go to universities because you can get them free there, or the Library of Congress. But for the public who maybe doesn't live right next to a university, that's impossible to get that information. So that's kind of where I step in. I bridge the gap between that inaccessible, cold science and the public, bringing the science to the people who need to hear most about the results to make educated decisions about their lives. And not only does the Organic Center do its own research, so we have a lot of really cool projects that I'd encourage you to go to our website to check out, but we also take articles like the one I mentioned that I purchased for $32 and write summaries of it. And we do this in many different forms. So everything from a 1-sentence description to a paragraph description to a more thorough description of what happens in those papers. We post on social media, we do infographics, we have recipes where we talk about the main ingredients of the different recipes and the science behind those ingredients. So we try and get the science to the people who might be interested in those science articles, but also might not be interested in science. Maybe you're just looking for a really delicious recipe, then we'll sneak science into that recipe so that people, even if they think they're not interested in science, they'll find out about science and it filters into their lives. So they become more educated and realize that those barriers that get set up in front of scientific information are just constructs of our society. So one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this job is that I used to be one of those people who was alienated from science. And I don't tell the story of how I came into science very often. In fact, I tell it exactly once a year here at Project Green Challenge. So bear with me. This isn't a narrative that I am used to giving, because when I go up in front of scientific audiences or even consumers, I put on my science uniform and act like I've been a scientist since I was born. That is not the case. And it wasn't that I didn't care. It's just that I couldn't connect with science. So I saw myself as separate from the environmental community, that it didn't even occur to me that I could make a difference. I didn't have any role models that I could relate to. So the people that I saw working towards sustainability, and especially people working in science, weren't like me. They were white men in lab coats. They were movie stars. They were people who didn't look like me, talk like me, or live in a community like mine. They were separate. It just wasn't something that I was a part of. I remember in high school, I had a teacher who stood up in front of the class on the first day and said, you know, a lot of you probably think you don't like science. I didn't like science when I was your age, and then I learned to love it, and I became a science teacher. And I remember looking at her and thinking, oh my God, that will never happen to me. So I went to college, and I majored in art. And I majored in art for my first 3 years at the university. I focused on painting, I focused on drawing, I focused on fashion design, without a thought for the environment. I mean, what does the environment have to do with art, or art with the environment? But I was lucky. My family's from Argentina, and the winter of my junior year, I went down to visit them, and I spent a month with my great aunt, Nita. And she was teaching painting at the local university. So we instantly bonded over art. But then I started learning about her history. So she wasn't originally an artist. That's something she picked up later in life. And right now she's in her 90s. So she picked this up when she was in her late 60s, 70s. She actually started her life and spent most of her life as a chemist. So she got a PhD in chemistry in the 1940s when, first of all, women did not get PhDs in chemistry. Even if you look at the statistics today, most women are not getting PhDs in chemistry. That's a very male-dominated field. In addition to that, she was doing it in a very machismo country. Argentina's history is very male-centric, even more so than the United States, which still has its own issues. And my family's Jewish, and Argentina is extremely anti-Semitic. So hearing her story kind of made me check my privilege for a second. She accomplished so much, and it made me realize that people like me, people with untraditional backgrounds, even young women without much experience, could do science. And when I looked at my own life, the obstacles that I'm facing are so small compared to what she overcame that I decided to challenge myself. So when I went back to college, I decided to take the absolute hardest class that I could possibly think of, which was chemistry. And the first day, the professor walked into the class, and he started speaking, and he had an Argentine accent. So my chemistry professor turned out to be from Argentina, and hearing that accent, the accent that I grew up with, the accent that reminds me of my aunt and uncle, my cousins, my grandparents, made me feel like I was surrounded by my family, like I belonged. And that's just, it seems like a bunch of circumstances that were strung together by luck. If I hadn't had that experience with my aunt, if I hadn't had a teacher who was part of a community that I was a part of, I don't think that I would be here today. Another thing that my aunt did is she told me that art and the environment are linked. So this is something that I had never thought of before. And she had a lot. So as a chemist, growing up with science, thinking about the environment, and then turning into an artist later in her life, she told me that art is this tool that you can use to solve any problem, none greater than saving the inspiration for most of our art, the environment. So I was able to use my art as a tool for environmental science communication to reach people who might not come from backgrounds where environmental interaction is the norm, like most of my life. And we desperately need environmental leaders and role models for people not born into this community. And that's where all of you come in. So you're making a difference right now. Your projects, your organizations, the things that you're involved with, they're all making a difference as we speak. But in addition to what you're doing right now and the changes that we're going to see within the next year, within the next 3 years, even within the next 10 years, isn't all that you're doing. You're also making a long-term contribution to the environmental community by inspiring others, people who need role models like you to get involved. If I had known youth like you, if I had one friend or mentor like you, it might not have taken me so long to get involved in environmental science. And like I said, I got lucky. If I hadn't happened to have a family member who could make me feel like part of the community, who knows what I'd be doing. So you're all ahead of the game. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're fighting for a more sustainable system puts you way ahead of most people. And with that head start, you're going to be able to become the leaders we need to guide us to an environmental future. I am so glad that you're out there. And really quickly, before I finish, I just want to tell you something that I always add to my talks here at Project Green Challenge, and it's something that I wish I had known when I got started. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the theme that we've been talking a lot about today, which is feeling like you belong, or what I mentioned when I started this talk, which is I put on my scientific aura, my persona. You're not always gonna feel like you belong. Some days you're gonna feel like you tricked everyone into thinking that you're part of the environmental community. You're gonna think that you don't know enough, or you don't have enough experience, or it's only a matter of time before people figure you out. Well, I am here to tell you that everyone feels like that. My mom always told me, fake it till you make it. And that's kind of what I do a lot of the time. I just acknowledge the feeling and realize it's there, and then I ignore it for what it is. It's really just a feeling. It's not reality. It's so common, in fact, that there is a term for it. It's called the imposter syndrome, and I get it all the time. Sometimes I think, what am I doing in a room full of scientists, or a room full of environmentalists, or a room full of X, Y, or Z? I don't belong here. I'm an artist, or I'm a craft tinkerer, or I'm nobody when I'm compared to all these great thinkers. And it took me way too long to realize that half the other people in the room are always feeling that exact same way. So keep up the good work. You're gonna get obstacles thrown at you. You're gonna feel like you don't belong, like what you're doing isn't making a difference. Just remember that you are needed. You're doing important work, and without you, people like you, none of us would be here right now. I sure wouldn't. So, thank you.